The courtroom buzzed with tension, long before the trial officially began. It wasn't just any case. This one involved allegations of child abuse at a local daycare in rural Pennsylvania, and the key witness was a toddler. Reporters filled the gallery, murmuring into phones and scribbling into notepads. Police officers stood posted near the entrance, arms folded, eyes scanning for disruption. Parents of other children from the same daycare sat quietly in the back row, some nervously clutching tissues, others holding each other's hands. The accused, a once trusted daycare worker named Carl Benson, sat at the defendant's table. His face was unreadable. He had maintained his innocence from the beginning. But the investigation had uncovered something chilling. Several children had stopped speaking entirely, and a particular 3-year-old girl, named Emily, became the center of it all. She hadn't said a single word since the day of the alleged incident. Today, Emily was set to take the stand. Whispers hushed as the courtroom door opened slowly. A small figure appeared in the doorway. Emily walked in holding tightly onto a stuffed white bunny, her eyes wide and unsure. Her mother knelt beside her, gently guiding her toward the front. But Emily wasn't alone. Beside her padded a golden retriever wearing a service vest labeled K-9 Support Unit, Comfort Division. His name was Max. Max wasn't just any dog. He was specially trained to support child victims during stressful interviews and courtroom appearances. He had sat beside dozens of children before, but this was the first time a courtroom had been so silent, so emotionally still. As Emily stepped forward, the only sound was the soft jingle of Max's collar. Her mother led her to the witness stand, then stepped away at the judge's nod. Emily climbed into the seat, her little legs dangling, bunny in one hand, the other resting gently on Max's head. Everyone watched. The judge, an older woman with kind eyes, leaned slightly forward. "Emily," she said softly, "you're very brave to be here. You're safe now. You can speak when you're ready." Emily didn't respond. She blinked and looked down at her lap. Her mother gave an encouraging nod from her seat. Max nudged her with his nose, then laid his head on her feet. A full minute passed, then 2. Just as the prosecutor was about to request a recess, something happened. Emily slowly lifted her hand and pointed straight at Max. The judge tilted her head. "Emily?" she asked gently. The entire room held its breath. The girl opened her mouth, voice barely a whisper. He saw it too. You could hear the sound of pens dropping. The prosecutor froze, mouth parted in shock. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Emily didn't look at the defendant. She looked only at Max. "He barked," she added, her voice a little louder. "When the man hurt me, he barked." Every muscle in the defendant's face twitched. The judge blinked, stunned. "Excuse me?" she asked, not because she hadn't heard, but because everyone else needed to hear it again. Emily swallowed. She leaned down and wrapped her arms around Max's neck. "He didn't like the bad room," he growled. No one moved. A courtroom packed with grown adults sat in stunned silence, listening to a toddler share something unspeakably real. The room, once skeptical of what a 3-year-old could offer, suddenly recognized the truth. This child had carried something heavy for far too long. Max, silent and still, seemed to understand. The judge cleared her throat and ordered a recess. But it was clear, this wasn't just a child speaking. This was the beginning of something much bigger. Courtroom security opened the side doors, and people slowly filed out into the hallway during recess, their expressions stunned. Reporters whispered into microphones, trying to quickly piece together the shocking moment they had just witnessed. A 3-year-old girl, silent for weeks, had pointed at a support dog and claimed he witnessed the abuse. The energy in the courthouse had completely shifted. Inside the judge's chambers, the legal teams regrouped. Prosecutor James Keller leaned against the table, flipping through his notes, stunned. He saw it too, he repeated aloud. She wasn't speaking figuratively. She believes the dog witnessed it, responded to it. The defense attorney scoffed. You're not seriously considering testimony from a toddler and a dog? Why not? Keller shot back. Emily has said more in that moment than your client has said truthfully in months. And as for Max, he's a trained K-9, not just a pet. His behavior could be documented and used as corroboration. Meanwhile, in the quiet hallway near the witness room, Emily sat on a cushioned bench, Max's head resting on her lap. Her mother stroked her hair gently, still overwhelmed with emotion. That was very brave, sweetie, she whispered. You're helping others now. You're not alone anymore. Emily nodded and looked down at Max. He barked when the bad man came close. He didn't like him. Just then, Detective Sarah Morgan arrived. She was Max's handler and one of the first officers on the scene weeks earlier. She had visited the daycare to observe the staff and interact with the children using Max as a calming presence. What she remembered still haunted her. I need to speak with the prosecutor, Sarah told the bailiff. There's something about that day we didn't take seriously enough at the time. Back inside the courtroom, as the judge returned to the bench and called the session back to order, Sarah took the stand. I'm Detective Sarah Morgan, K-9 Trauma Unit. I've worked with Max for 3 years. He's trained to sense anxiety, fear, and emotional distress in children. When we entered the daycare that day, Max reacted unusually. The prosecutor gestured for her to elaborate. He barked at the nap room door, she said clearly. He growled and refused to enter. I had to leash him and pull him back. That's highly irregular. Max is usually calm. Emily, watching from her seat with her mom, whispered, That's when it happened. Everyone turned to look. She remembers, Keller said. Stunned, Sarah nodded solemnly. Dogs like Max don't speak, but they communicate. His behavior was a red flag, and now with Emily's words, it connects. The judge asked the court clerk to play body cam footage from the original daycare investigation. The grainy video appeared on screen. Officers entered the building. Max sniffed the hallway calmly until they reached the nap room. The moment they neared the door, Max's ears perked. He growled. A second later, he barked sharply and backed away, tail rigid. The courtroom was silent. Is that the behavior of a dog reacting to trauma? The judge asked. Yes, Your Honor, Sarah replied. Max was signaling something wasn't right inside that room. Emily squeezed her mother's hand and whispered again. That's when the bad man was there. The prosecutor stood. Your Honor, we now have 2 testimonies, one verbal, one behavioral. Both point to the same room, same time, and same suspect. The defense remained seated, shaken. The once confident smirk on Carl Benson's face had faded. The judge called for a short adjournment and instructed the jury to consider the new evidence carefully. As the jury filed out, Emily and Max were escorted out quietly, avoiding the growing press crowd. Flashbulbs burst through the windows as cameras snapped their exit. Outside, one reporter turned to the camera and whispered into her mic. Today, a toddler and a dog may have just changed the entire course of this trial. And it was only just beginning. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as the projection screen flickered off. The body cam footage still lingered in everyone's minds. The image of Max growling at the nap room door felt impossible to ignore. For many in the room, the question was no longer whether something had happened. It was how deeply the dog had sensed it. Detective Sarah Morgan remained composed on the stand, her hand resting on Max's leash. The judge turned to her with curiosity. Detective Morgan, has Max ever reacted like that during other investigations? She shook her head. No, Your Honor, not like that. Max is a certified emotional support K-9. He's trained to remain calm under pressure, especially around children. His behavior that day wasn't random. The prosecutor stepped forward, holding a small file. Your Honor, we'd like to submit Max's behavior logs. Each K-9 officer is documented during field operations. This includes timestamps, reactions, and handler notes. The judge nodded, signaling approval. As the prosecutor handed the logbook to the clerk, he continued, "What we see here is not a pet acting unpredictably. We see a trained responder giving a behavioral alert, an alert that aligns with Emily's description." Carl Benson shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His attorney whispered something, but his face had turned pale. He could no longer pretend. This was just a child's confusion or fantasy. Meanwhile, Emily waited in a private side room, drawing quietly with crayons. Max, during the recess, had returned to sit beside her. She had drawn a picture of the daycare. In one corner, she colored a dark red door. Next to it, she scribbled Max with a large speech bubble that read, "Woof." Stop. The drawing was simple, childlike, but it echoed the truth. She'd spoken in court. Emily's mother held back tears as she showed it to the child therapist present in the room. "She's remembering everything," she whispered. "It's all coming back." Back in the courtroom, the prosecutor began building on the momentum. "We interviewed 3 other staff members," he said, turning to face the jury. Each claimed that they didn't hear or see anything unusual that day. But all 3 of them mentioned one thing: the dog barked near the nap room. He pointed at the screen. They shrugged it off as just noise. But Max's bark wasn't meaningless. It was a warning. He walked slowly past the jury box. We've asked ourselves how a toddler could describe something so specific: the dog barking, the bracelet, the door. But maybe the better question is, how could she know all this if it didn't happen? The defense finally stood. Objection. Speculation based on a child's memory and a dog's growl? But even the judge's tone had changed. "Counselor, you're welcome to cross-examine the testimony. But what we've heard so far cannot be dismissed." The defense attorney faltered, glancing toward Benson. "We'll reserve cross for later." As the prosecution rested for the day, murmurs echoed throughout the courtroom. People leaned into each other, whispering, clearly shaken. Even the most skeptical faces now looked uncertain. Outside, news stations ran the headline, "Support Dog Becomes Star Witness in Shocking Abuse Trial." Emily's drawing, released with her mother's permission, went viral. Inside the courthouse, the judge requested a sealed session for the following day to allow Emily, if emotionally stable, to share more under controlled conditions. And that night, for the first time since the daycare incident, Emily slept soundly. Max curled beside her bed on the floor of the safe house, his ears twitching as if still on duty. He wasn't just her comfort. He had become her protector, her silent witness, and now her truth. And the trial, once expected to be difficult to prove, was slowly beginning to crack open. All because of a little girl's courage and the dog that never left her side. The next morning, the courtroom buzzed with an energy that was different from days before. Everyone, reporters, attorneys. The jury had sensed a turning point. What had started as a fragile case now had weight, evidence, and something more powerful than any expert: belief. People believed Emily, but the prosecution knew belief wasn't enough. They needed more. In a sealed session, the judge allowed Emily to speak again, this time in a private courtroom with only essential personnel, therapists, her mother, and of course, Max. Cameras were turned off. The session was recorded strictly for evidence. Emily sat on a soft chair, Max's head on her lap. A child psychologist spoke gently. "Can you tell us more about what happened that day?" Emily looked down at her drawing, clutched in her hand. "He wore a blue bracelet," she said softly, The prosecutor leaned forward. A blue bracelet? She nodded. It had little stars on it. He always wore it. It jingled when he touched my arm. That detail had never been made public. Back in the main courtroom, the prosecution re-entered with a new sense of urgency. Detective Morgan was called back to the stand. We searched the locker belonging to the defendant, she began. Inside was a blue rubber bracelet, small silver stars embedded. No one knew it existed until Emily described it. The defense objected immediately. It's a common accessory. It proves nothing. But the judge overruled. The fact that she described it, unprompted, gives it context. Continue. The prosecution nodded. Your Honor, we also retrieved surveillance footage from a hallway security camera that initially was dismissed due to its angle. But we enhanced the frames and slowed the footage. Please direct your attention to the screen. The grainy video played. The timestamp matched the estimated time of the incident. A blurred figure dragged a child-sized object into the nap room. The footage lacked audio, and faces were indistinct, but there was one detail everyone saw clearly. A flash of blue on the figure's wrist. Collective shiver passed through the courtroom. This aligns with Emily's testimony, the prosecutor said. And the same room where Max barked, the bracelet, the action, the time. It all matches. The defense struggled. Objection. The footage is unclear. But the bracelet is not, the prosecutor fired back. Neither is Max's behavior. Neither is a traumatized child's words. The judge remained still for a long moment, then finally said, overruled. The evidence may stand. In the back row, parents of other children gasped, some weeping. The case had just shifted from emotional to undeniable. Emily's mother clutched her hands tightly. She could barely breathe as she watched the puzzle fall into place, one piece after another. The courtroom was quiet as Max was brought back in and allowed to sit at Emily's feet for a brief moment, offering her silent strength. The judge watched him with new respect. I've seen many kinds of witnesses, she said softly, but never one like this. Max tilted his head as if he understood. After the session ended for the day, the media swarmed outside. Reporters called it the trial turned by a toddler and her dog. That night, television screens across the country showed clips of Max with his golden fur and calm eyes, sitting beside Emily. Her voice, soft but unwavering, played again and again. He saw it too. The courtroom had expected a child too. Young to help. Instead, they had found a voice stronger than anyone imagined, and a four-legged partner who had never stopped trying to tell the truth. And the truth, at last, was beginning to roar. By now, the entire city was watching. What started as a quiet trial, tucked inside a modest Pennsylvania courthouse, had become national news. Morning shows led with headlines like, Toddler and K-9 reveal hidden truth, and Emily's silence shattered the system. Images of the small girl holding Max's leash became iconic. Outside the courthouse, supporters gathered with signs that read, We believe Emily, and justice has four legs. Parents who had once sent their children to the same daycare now stood shoulder to shoulder, demanding answers. Some began questioning if their own children had suffered in silence too. Inside, the tension thickened. The judge allowed the next witness, a daycare employee named Melanie Clark. She had worked alongside the defendant and claimed she never saw anything suspicious. But under pressure, and after seeing the footage, her tone changed. I thought Max was just being difficult that day, she admitted, shifting nervously. But now, maybe he was reacting to something real. The prosecutor leaned in. Did you ever see the defendant wear a blue bracelet? Melanie paused, then quietly, Yes, almost every day. He said it helped with anxiety. That small confirmation sent ripples across the jury. Then came a shocking twist. Another parent came forward, Their child, a shy 4-year-old boy named Lucas, had been quiet for weeks. But after seeing Emily on television, he whispered to his parents, "The man hurt Emily and told me to not tell." The dog barked. The prosecution requested a sealed testimony from Lucas. A therapist and Max were brought in once again to comfort the young boy. In the private session, Lucas didn't say much, but he said enough. He pushed her, he whispered. Emily was crying. The dog didn't like it. The judge reviewed the session carefully and approved the boy's words as admissible testimony. Back in the courtroom, the jury began connecting the dots. The bracelet, the hallway footage, Max's reaction, Emily's statement, and now another child, without prompting. Repeating the same story, the defense scrambled. "Your Honor, this is emotional manipulation. We're relying on the words of toddlers and the bark of a dog, but the judge had heard enough. Counselor, we're relying on corroborated witness statements supported by behavioral evidence and physical items found in the defendant's possession. Sit down." For the first time since the trial began, Carl Benson looked genuinely afraid. He stared at the bracelet on the prosecution table, then at Emily sitting quietly beside her mother in the back. Then finally, at Max calm, steady, unmoved. As the day closed, the prosecutor made a quiet statement to the press. "We came into this trial thinking we had a difficult road, but Emily led us forward with just a few words. And Max helped. U.S. Listen." That evening, Emily's drawing updated to show Lucas and a smiling Max circulated online. It showed a new scene. Max standing tall, tail wagging, while children stood safe behind him. The caption, written in childlike scribble, read, "Max keeps us safe now." Across the country, people were moved. Petitions started for stronger child protection policies in daycares. Schools requested therapy dogs. People asked, why did it take a toddler and a dog to show us the truth? But perhaps it wasn't about what they said, it was about what no one else could. Emily didn't need to speak paragraphs. She just needed to point and trust Max. And Max, who couldn't say a single word, spoke louder than anyone in the room. The sun rose behind a wall of flashing cameras and bustling reporters. The courthouse steps were lined with journalists, child advocacy groups, and families holding signs of support. The city had rallied behind Emily, Lucas, and every voiceless child whose stories had been hidden until now. Inside the courtroom, the final phase had begun. The prosecutor stood before the jury with a presence both calm and commanding. This case began with silence. A little girl so traumatized she couldn't speak. But when she did, what she said couldn't be ignored. She pointed at a dog and unraveled a lie. He paused, then gestured toward Max, who sat silently by Emily's side again. This dog barked when others stayed silent. He reacted when the defendant approached. And now, we've heard two children unprompted describe the same man, the same bracelet, and the same room where something terrible happened. He walked slowly, letting his words settle. You have a duty not just to facts, but to truth. And the truth has been spoken in whispers, in drawings, and in the actions of a loyal animal. Then the defense rose. Ladies and gentlemen, we cannot convict based on emotion. Children are impressionable. Dogs bark. That's not guilt. That's interpretation. The footage is blurry. The bracelet is common. And the rest, well, that's fear driving imagination. The courtroom remained quiet. The jury's faces were unreadable. The judge issued her final instructions, then dismissed the jury to deliberate. Outside, the world waited. Inside, Emily sat in a private room, Max at her feet as volunteers handed out juice and crayons. Her mother watched her with awe. Her tiny daughter had become a symbol of courage. Hours passed. Then, the call came. The jury had reached a verdict. Everyone filed back into the courtroom. The judge entered. The jury returned. Even Carl Benson, looked pale and anxious now, his confidence shattered. The foreperson stood. We, the jury, find the defendant, Carl Benson, guilty on all counts. A collective gasp filled the room. Then came tears. Emily's mother gripped her hands over her mouth as she sobbed. Lucas' parents embraced in quiet relief. The prosecutor closed his eyes briefly, allowing the weight of justice to settle. Carl Benson slumped back in his chair, stunned. He stared at nothing. The bracelet sat on the evidence table beside him like a ghost that had followed him to the end. The judge addressed the room, voice calm but firm. This court thanks the bravery of its youngest witnesses, and also recognizes the role of K-9. Max, whose training and instinct provided key behavioral evidence. Sometimes justice comes not with a loud voice, but with a whisper and a bark. A few people chuckled tearfully. Max wagged his tail once. Outside, as the news broke, crowds cheered. Headlines flashed across every platform. Guilty verdict in Toddler K-9 trial, and justice for Emily and Lucas. When Emily was told the news in her quiet waiting room, she didn't speak right away. She simply reached down, wrapped her arms around Max's neck, and said, "We did it." He leaned into her hug. Later that evening, as the courthouse emptied and cameras rolled, the image that captured hearts across the country was not of the judge, the jury, or the defendant. It was of a little girl walking out, holding her stuffed bunny in one hand and Max's leash in the other. Justice had come not with shouting, not with dramatic speeches, but with trust, truth, and the unbreakable bond between a child and her dog. The courthouse stood quiet now, its halls cleared of tension, its rooms no longer filled with whispers of doubt. A verdict had been rendered, justice delivered. But the impact of the trial continued to ripple far beyond its walls. That morning, Emily and Max were invited to the city's public safety building. The mayor, city officials, and a full team of law enforcement stood waiting. Flashbulbs popped as Emily entered, holding Max's leash with surprising calm for a child just 3 years old. She wore a blue dress, ironically, the same shade as the infamous bracelet, and a tiny badge-shaped sticker that read, "Junior Hero." Max, freshly groomed and wearing a blue ribbon around his collar, walked beside her with purpose. The mayor knelt to her level and smiled warmly. "Emily, on behalf of this city, we want to thank you and Max. You showed courage that most adults wouldn't have. And today, we honor that." A shiny medal was clipped to Max's vest, for bravery in service to justice. His tail wagged. Oblivious to the ceremony, but happy to be near Emily, reporters snapped pictures. One photo, Emily smiling up at Max as he licked her cheek, would appear on magazine covers across the country. That single image came to define the trial far more than any courtroom transcript ever could, but the recognition didn't stop there. The district attorney's office announced the launch of a new initiative, Emily's Circle, a program designed to provide therapy animals for children involved in trauma-related investigations. It aimed to ensure that no child would have to sit alone in fear while telling the truth. Max would be its mascot. Later that afternoon, Emily sat in her therapist's office, drawing quietly while Max lay at her feet. Her mother looked on, still overwhelmed, but visibly lighter. "She's talking more now," the therapist said gently. "Not just about what happened, about everything. She's laughing again. That's the real miracle." The therapist leaned over to look at Emily's drawing. It showed Max, wearing his medal, standing in front of a big building. Behind him were other children holding hands. The sun shone brightly overhead. In blocky, childlike letters, the caption read, "Max keeps all the kids safe now." Outside the office, the world was still reacting. News stations invited child psychologists and legal experts to discuss the case. One segment titled "The Bark That Broke the Silence" focused on how trauma-informed courtroom procedures could help more children speak out. Another covered Max's training and the growing need for more. K-9 support teams across the nation. People began donating to therapy dog programs in record numbers. Meanwhile, in the quiet of their home, Emily's mother tucked her into bed. Max curled up on the floor beside her, like he always did. "Can Max stay here forever?" Emily asked sleepily. Her mom smiled, brushing back her hair. "Max will always be part of your story." "And yes, sweetie, he's yours now." Max raised his head as if he'd heard his name. Emily reached over the side of the bed and gently patted his head. "Good boy," she whispered. Outside, the world kept spinning. Headlines faded, and cameras moved on. But for one little girl and her golden-furred guardian, life was just beginning again, this time with healing, safety, and peace. Max didn't need applause or recognition. All he ever needed was one thing: for the children he served to feel safe again. And for Emily, he had done exactly that. 6 months had passed since the verdict, but the impact of Emily and Max's story had only grown. Across the country, people still spoke of the moment a 3-year-old girl shattered a courtroom silence with 5 words, and how a golden retriever's bark had spoken louder than anyone ever imagined. In Washington, D.C., something remarkable was underway. A bill was introduced in Congress under bipartisan sponsorship, Emily's Law. It proposed that certified K-9 support dogs be allowed in all federal and state courtrooms to assist minors testifying in abuse and trauma-related cases. The bill also included funding for training new K-9 units and offering trauma support for young witnesses. The proposal passed unanimously through committee. When it came time for a public hearing, there was one guest everyone waited to see: Emily. Now 4 years old, she stood with surprising confidence beside her mother and Max. Her hair was neatly tied with a sky blue ribbon. She wore a blazer several sizes too big, and her small fingers clutched Max's leash tightly. The room fell into a respectful hush as she approached the microphone. She looked to her mother, then down at Max. And then, in a soft but clear voice, she said, "Max helped me be brave. I want him to help other kids too." It was all she needed to say. Applause followed, quiet at first, then rising with emotion. Lawmakers wiped their eyes. One representative said later, "I've never heard a shorter testimony make a bigger impact." Max, ever calm, simply sat beside her, tail thumping gently against the floor. Within weeks, Emily's Law passed with overwhelming support. Courtrooms across the United States began integrating K-9 comfort programs. Child therapists and prosecutors nationwide praised the shift, calling it one of the most compassionate legal reforms in decades. Back in Pennsylvania, Emily returned to her routines, attending school, playing in parks, sleeping soundly. The darkness she once carried had lifted, little by little, thanks to support, therapy, and above all, Max. He remained her constant companion. He was there when she woke up. He waited for her by the classroom door. He lay beside her bed each night, like a guardian angel with a golden coat. One afternoon, a journalist visited their home for a follow-up story. Emily welcomed her in and offered juice with a shy smile. Max sat proudly by her side as the woman asked, "Do you remember the trial?" Emily nodded, but didn't look afraid. "I was scared." But Max wasn't. The journalist smiled. "Do you think you would have spoken without him?" Emily thought for a second, then shook her head. "He told me it was okay. Not with words, just with his heart." That quote became the headline. Not with words, just with his heart. Few months later, Emily's school hosted a special event called Heroes Day. Police officers, firefighters, doctors, and military veterans were invited to speak. But the loudest cheer came when a little girl walked onto the stage with a dog beside her, metal shining on his vest. The principal bent to the microphone and announced, "And now, our final hero, Max, the dog who changed the law." Children clapped. Parents wiped tears. Emily, standing on stage with Max's leash in hand, beamed as she read her prepared sentence. Heroes don't always talk. Sometimes they bark. And sometimes they help you find your voice. The crowd rose in a standing ovation. Some stories end in courts, some in headlines. But Emily's story didn't end there. It grew into a legacy, one of quiet strength, unwavering love, and the kind of bravery that doesn't shout, but still echoes forever. And every time Max wagged his tail beside a nervous child in a courtroom somewhere across the country, Emily's words lived on.